country road, take me home.
Thousands stand shoulder to shoulder at Coors Field in Denver, their voices rising in unison, singing the words that have echoed through generations. This is more than a tribute. It's a celebration of a man who didn't just sing about America, but became its voice. John Denver wasn't just a musician. He was a storyteller, a poet of the land, and a champion of the planet. His songs weren't just melodies. They were invitations to embrace nature, to find home wherever the heart leads, and to believe in a simpler, kinder world. He spoke to the dreamers, the wanderers, the lovers of open roads and endless skies. His music wasn't bound by genre or generation. It was timeless. And though he's gone, his legacy soars as high as the mountains he loved. Tonight, as thousands sing his words into the night, one thing is clear: John Denver never really left. His music, his message, his spirit remain, and they always will. Born on December 31st, 1943, in Roswell, New Mexico, Henry John Deutschendorf Jr. entered a world defined by structure, discipline, and movement. His father, a decorated Air Force pilot, lived by precision, by rules, by order. That way of life extended to the household, where expectations were high, emotions were often buried, and home was never a fixed location. The Deutschendorf family was constantly on the move, hopping from one military base to the next, never settling long enough to plant roots. For a young boy who longed for connection, it was a lonely existence. John was a quiet child, introspective, always searching for something to hold on to. His father wanted him to follow in his footsteps, to embrace the sky through aviation. But John found himself drawn to something else, something less tangible, something that couldn't be measured in military precision. He found it in music. It was his refuge, his escape, his way of making sense of a world that never stood still. At 11 years old, his grandmother handed him a gift that would change the course of his life: a worn, wooden acoustic guitar. He held it, ran his fingers over the strings, and something clicked inside him. It felt like home in a way nothing else ever had. That guitar became his closest companion, following him from base to base, its 6 strings providing the stability he never found in the ever-changing landscapes of his childhood. He learned by listening, by mimicking the voices of folk musicians who spoke of mountains and rivers and open roads, things he had never truly known but felt deeply in his soul. Pete Seeger, the Kingston Trio, Woody Guthrie. These were the voices that shaped his early musical identity. Music became more than a pastime. It became his language, his way of expressing the feelings he couldn't put into words. By the time he reached high school in Fort Worth, Texas, John had found a sense of belonging in performing. He joined the school choir, played at local gatherings, and slowly realized that music wasn't just something he loved. It was something he needed. But even then, the weight of expectation loomed. His father, ever the disciplinarian, envisioned a different path for him, one with structure, predictability, and a uniform. In 1961, he enrolled at Texas Tech University, following a path that seemed practical: architecture. But while his studies focused on blueprints and structures, his heart was elsewhere. He spent more time in coffee houses and music halls than in lecture halls, performing folk songs to small but captivated crowds. It was during this time that he realized he wasn't meant to design buildings. He was meant to build something else entirely: a voice, a legacy, a life in music. The folk scene of the early 1960s was alive with possibility. Young musicians, armed with little more than acoustic guitars and raw passion, were reshaping the landscape of American music. John wanted to be part of it. He left Texas Tech before finishing his degree, knowing that the structured world of architecture could never contain the dreams that were growing inside him. He joined a folk trio called the Alpine Trio, a stepping stone that allowed him to develop his stage presence and refine his sound. Then came a bigger opportunity, the Mitchell Trio, a well-established folk group that had already gained national attention. When their lead singer, Chad Mitchell, left, John was asked to step in. It was a pivotal moment, his first real taste of the music industry, a chance to perform in front of larger audiences and learn the inner workings of professional touring. But even as he found success with the group, something was missing. He was still singing other people's songs, still fitting into a mold that wasn't entirely his. The music industry was shifting, and folk music was at a crossroads. Some artists were leaning into political messages, using their voices as instruments of protest. Others were pushing folk into new directions, blending it with country and pop to create something fresh. John found himself somewhere in the middle, searching for a sound that was undeniably his own. There was another obstacle: his name. Henry John Deutschendorf Jr. wasn't exactly the kind of name that rolled off the tongue, and in an industry where image was everything, he needed something that matched the vision he had for himself. He thought about the places that had moved him, that had given him a sense of wonder and belonging. One name stood out: Denver. It was a place he had never lived, but had always dreamed of. A place that symbolized the freedom and beauty he wanted his music to capture. And so, he made a choice: John Denver. With that name change came something even bigger: the decision to go solo. It was a risk, stepping away from the security of an established group. But John knew that if he wanted to make his mark, he had to do it on his own terms. He packed up his guitar, left the Mitchell Trio, and set out on a new journey, one that would lead him to stages bigger than he had ever imagined. At that moment, he wasn't yet a household name. He wasn't yet the man whose songs would become anthems for generations. But he had something just as important: conviction. He had a voice, a vision, and a deep, unwavering belief that music could bring people together, that it could tell stories in a way nothing else could. And with that belief, he took his first steps down the road that would change his life forever. In 1969, John Denver made a decision that would change everything. After years of performing in folk groups and small venues, he signed a deal with RCA Records, officially stepping into the spotlight as a solo artist. It was a leap of faith, but John believed in his music. He had a vision, a voice, and a message that he knew could resonate with people far beyond the folk circuit. Even before his name was widely known, his songwriting was making waves. That same year, a song he had written, "Leaving on a Jet Plane," was recorded by Peter, Paul, and Mary. It became their first and only #1 hit, a bittersweet anthem of departure that struck a chord with audiences everywhere. Almost overnight, John Denver went from an unknown songwriter to a hitmaker. But he wasn't content just writing for others. He wanted to sing his own songs, to tell his own stories, to forge his own path. The early years of his solo career were full of trial and error, playing small clubs, traveling endlessly, and working tirelessly to establish himself. His first few records saw moderate success, but nothing that catapulted him into the mainstream. That moment came in 1971 with a song that would define not only his career, but an entire generation. While working with Bill Danoff and Taffy Nivert, John was introduced to a song they had been working on, inspired by the winding country roads of Maryland. As soon as he heard it, he knew it had something special. Together, they refined the lyrics, adjusted the melody, and transformed it into what would become "Take Me Home, country roads. Despite never having set foot in West Virginia, John sang it with such sincerity and conviction that it felt like he had lived every word. When the song was released, it was an instant phenomenon. It climbed the charts, reaching number 2 on the Billboard Hot 100, and became an anthem for anyone who longed for a place to call home. The song wasn't just about a specific state. It was about nostalgia, belonging, and the deep emotional connection people have to the places they love. With that one song, John Denver had found his audience. From that point on, his rise was unstoppable. He had an uncanny ability to bridge the worlds of folk, country, and pop, crafting songs that appealed to an incredibly broad audience. His music was heartfelt and simple, yet profound. Whether he was singing about the beauty of nature, the warmth of love, or the joy of everyday life, people listened, and they connected. But it wasn't just the music that made him stand out. It was the man himself. His signature look became as recognizable as his songs. The round, wire-rimmed glasses, the shaggy blonde hair, the embroidered shirts. He was the antithesis of the rock stars dominating the airwaves at the time. There was nothing flashy about John Denver. No gimmicks, no scandals, just an open-hearted performer who sang about the things that truly mattered to him. His sincerity was his superpower. While other artists were diving into rebellion, cynicism, and excess, John sang about mountains, sunshine, and the quiet beauty of life. He was a breath of fresh air in an industry often driven by spectacle. People weren't just buying his records, they were buying into his vision of the world, one where kindness, nature, and human connection took center stage. By the early 1970s, John Denver had become more than a musician. He was a movement. His concerts were packed with fans who felt like they knew him, who saw their own hopes and dreams reflected in his lyrics. And this was just the beginning. The world was about to see just how far his music could take him. By the early 1970s, John Denver wasn't just a rising star. He was a household name. His music was everywhere, his voice instantly recognizable, his songs carrying a message of optimism and appreciation for life's simple joys. While the world was still grappling with the aftermath of Vietnam and the cynicism of Watergate, John Denver was offering something different. Songs about home, about love, about finding peace in the mountains and solace in the sun. From 1972 to 1975, hit after hit cemented his place at the top of the charts. Rocky Mountain High, a love letter to the beauty of Colorado, became an anthem for those who found their spirit in nature. Sunshine on My Shoulders was a quiet, introspective song, a reminder of the warmth and joy found in life's smallest moments. And then there was Annie's Song, written in just 10 minutes, but destined to last a lifetime. A heartfelt tribute to love so pure, it felt like a force of nature itself. These songs weren't just music. They were moments, snapshots of emotion that millions connected with on a deeply personal level. Awards and accolades followed. Grammy nominations, gold and platinum albums, and in 1975, one of the highest honors in country music, Country Music Association's Entertainer of the Year. Even in a genre where he was sometimes seen as an outsider, Denver's impact was undeniable. His songs had bridged the gap between folk, country, and pop, bringing people together in a way few artists ever could. From 1974 to 1977, John Denver was one of the highest-paid musicians in the world. He was selling out stadiums across the globe, playing to audiences who knew every word of every song. His concerts weren't just performances, they were shared experiences, where thousands of people sang along in unison, drawn together by the warmth and sincerity of his music. But fame, for John Denver, was never just about personal success. He saw his platform as a responsibility, a chance to use his voice for something greater. While others used their celebrity for excess, he used his for activism. He became a leading advocate for environmental conservation, speaking out about protecting nature long before it was fashionable. He didn't just sing about the beauty of the natural world, he fought to preserve it. His humanitarian work extended beyond environmental causes. He worked with UNICEF, dedicated himself to hunger relief efforts, and even used his music as a form of diplomacy. At the height of the Cold War, when tensions between the US and the Soviet Union were at their peak, John Denver took his guitar and his message of peace across borders, performing in the USSR as one of the first Western artists allowed to do so. He believed that music had the power to connect people in ways politics never could. And then, in 1977, he made an unexpected move. He became a movie star. Oh God, a comedy featuring Denver alongside the legendary George Burns, was an instant hit. He played an everyday man who is chosen by God to spread a simple message: kindness, love, and faith in humanity. It was a role that felt almost tailor-made for him. The film's success proved that Denver wasn't just a singer. He was a cultural icon, a presence that extended beyond music and into the broader world of entertainment. At the peak of his career, John Denver had become more than just a performer. He was a symbol of hope, a reminder that there was still beauty in the world, that even in uncertain times, there was always something to be grateful for. His songs weren't just hits, they were the soundtrack to people's lives. And as his fame continued to grow, he never lost sight of the reasons he started singing in the first place. His music wasn't about chasing trends or topping charts. It was about connection, about love, about home. And for millions of fans, John Denver had become exactly that. By the 1980s, John Denver's life had taken a turn, one that even his most heartfelt songs couldn't soften. The man who had once seemed untouchable, soaring to the top of the charts and filling stadiums with his music, was facing battles that no stage could hide. His world, both personally and professionally, was shifting, and the changes were anything but easy. His marriage to Annie Martel, the woman who had inspired one of his most beloved songs, had reached its breaking point. The couple, once seen as the perfect embodiment of the love Denver so often sang about, had grown apart. Years of relentless touring, the pressures of fame, and the weight of unspoken struggles had taken their toll. Their divorce in 1982 was painful and public, culminating in a moment that shocked even his closest friends, an incident where, in a fit of anger, Denver took a chainsaw to their marital bed. It was an image that clashed sharply with his gentle, easygoing public persona, but it was a sign of a man struggling with emotions he couldn't always control. As his personal life unraveled, so did his grip on the career he had built. The music industry was changing. The folk-inspired, nature-loving sound that had defined his success was being overshadowed by the rise of rock, new wave, and synthesizer-driven pop. The songs that had once dominated the airwaves were now struggling to find a place on the charts. While John continued to release music, the commercial impact wasn't the same. With the pressures mounting, his relationship with alcohol deepened. Friends noticed the shift. His once unshakable optimism now seemed weighed down by something heavier. He was arrested for DUI multiple times, his struggles with drinking making headlines in a way that his music no longer did. It was a far cry from the man fans had idolized for years, the man whose voice had symbolized warmth, joy, and simplicity. In 1986, RCA, the label that had helped launch his career, made a decision that sent a clear message: they dropped him from their roster. It was an unceremonious end to a partnership that had once produced some of the biggest hits of the decade. For John, it was more than just a business move. It was confirmation that the industry had moved on, leaving him behind. But if he was down, he wasn't out. He never stopped making music, never stopped touring, never stopped believing in the power of song to connect with people. He played smaller venues, found new audiences, and leaned more heavily into the causes he cared about. If the mainstream no longer had space for him, he would create his own. The 1990s brought more changes, but the struggles didn't disappear. His second marriage, to actress Cassandra Delaney, began with hope, but ended in another painful divorce in 1993. Financial issues surfaced, and legal troubles with the IRS added to his growing list of burdens. The man who had once seemed so carefree was now constantly fighting against the industry, against his demons, against the perception that he no longer belonged. Still, through it all, he held on to the things that had always mattered most to him. He remained dedicated to environmental activism, fighting for conservation and speaking out on issues close to his heart. He continued to perform, to write, to pour himself into the music that had defined him from the very beginning. John Denver had always sung about life's beauty, but by the end of his career, he understood its struggles just as well. He had loved, lost, risen, and fallen. And yet, through every hardship, he never stopped searching for something deeper, something that could lift him back into the light. By the 1990s, John Denver was no longer the dominant chart-topping force he had been in the 70s, but his music had never truly faded. While mainstream radio had moved on, his songs continued to find new audiences, especially overseas. In Asia, particularly in China, he was more than just a folk singer. He was a cultural bridge. His messages of peace, nature, and unity resonated deeply, and his concerts there were met with overwhelming enthusiasm. For many, he wasn't just an American musician, he was a global voice for something greater. Despite no longer being at the center of pop culture, John never slowed down. He continued performing at a relentless pace, averaging over 100 shows a year. His audiences may have changed, the venues may have been smaller, but the passion was the same. Whether playing for thousands in a packed hall or an intimate crowd in a quieter setting, he brought the same warmth, the same sincerity, the same love for music that had defined him from the very beginning. Away from the stage, another lifelong passion was growing: flying. John had always loved the sky, a love he had inherited from his father, a decorated Air Force pilot. While his father had dreamed of John following in his footsteps as a military aviator, John's relationship with flying took a different path. To him, flying wasn't about control or discipline. It was about freedom. It was the ultimate escape, the closest thing to the soaring feeling his music gave him. Over the years, he became an accomplished pilot, logging thousands of flight hours. Aviation wasn't just a hobby. It was an integral part of his identity. He often flew himself to concerts, seeing the world from above in a way few ever could. But flying, like music, carried its risks. He had been warned about the dangers of experimental aircraft, but the thrill, the connection to the sky, was something he couldn't resist. On October 12, 1997, John Denver climbed into his Rutan Long EZ, an experimental aircraft built for speed and efficiency. He had flown countless times before, but this flight would be his last. While flying over Monterey Bay, California, something went wrong. His plane, suffering from fuel complications, went down. At just 53 years old, the man who had spent his life singing about soaring through the sky, was gone. News of his death spread quickly, sending shockwaves through the music world and beyond. Tributes poured in from fans, fellow artists, and world leaders. Memorial concerts were held, and his songs filled the airwaves once more, a reminder of the joy and beauty he had brought to so many. From country singers to rock legends, from folk artists to international performers, voices from every genre honored him, recognizing the undeniable impact he had left behind. John Denver's music had always been about connection between people, between nature and humanity, between dreams and reality. And in his passing, that connection didn't fade. His songs continued to be played, his lyrics continued to be sung, and his message of love, peace, and appreciation for the world around us continued to inspire. He may have left the earth, but through his music, his spirit never truly landed. It simply kept soaring. John Denver's music was never just about a moment in time. It was about something bigger, something timeless. Decades after his voice first filled the airwaves, his songs still find new life, new listeners, new meaning. His melodies remain as comforting as ever, his lyrics as powerful as the day they were written. From stadiums to quiet campfires, from tribute concerts to viral covers by modern artists, his music continues to bridge generations, proving that true artistry never fades. But his legacy isn't just about the music, it's about the message. John sang about the beauty of the natural world, not just to celebrate it, but to protect it. His environmental activism, once seen as idealistic, now feels prophetic. In a time when climate change threatens the landscapes he loved, his call to cherish and preserve nature is more urgent than ever. His Windstar Foundation may be gone, but his influence can be felt in every movement dedicated to conservation, in every voice advocating for the planet. His songs weren't just about admiring the world, they were a plea to safeguard it. Beyond the mountains and the rivers, beyond the melodies and harmonies, John Denver left something even greater behind: connection. His music brought people together, creating a sense of home no matter where you were. His songs weren't just personal, they belonged to everyone. They were the soundtrack to road trips, weddings, quiet moments of reflection, and the kind of joy that only music can bring. And so, his voice lives on. In the voices of artists who reinterpret his songs, in the voices of fans who still sing along, passing his music down like a cherished story. In the voices of those who believe, as he did, in a world that is still worth loving, still worth protecting, still worth singing about. Now, as Rocky Mountain High plays one last time, as the sun sets behind the peaks he loved so dearly, one question remains. What's your favorite John Denver song? And more importantly, what does it mean to you?